The reason Israel has not yet launched a counterattack against Iran. The Prime Minister of Slovakia believes that Russia will win Ukraine and will never return Crimea and Donbass to Kiev. Why hasn't Israel launched a counterattack against Iran? Although the War Cabinet continuously meets, Israel has still not agreed on how to respond to Iran's attack in the first direct military confrontation between the two Middle Eastern countries. 4 days after Iran's airstrike, Israel has still not agreed on a response. Israel must balance international pressure to show restraint on the one hand, while also seeking an appropriate response to an unprecedented attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu must now weigh between the right-wing coalition's call for a strong response to Iran and the risk of being further isolated by the international community by expanding the war without the support of other countries. After a nearly 3-hour meeting on April 15, Israel's War Cabinet remained determined to respond to Iran's attack. Despite pressure from allies not to escalate the conflict, Chief of Staff of the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, said Iran's attack on Israel will be responded to. Israel's War Cabinet debated the timing and scope of the response, 2 Israeli officials familiar with the discussions told CNN. One official said Israel appeared to have to act quickly. According to a senior administration official and a source familiar with the intelligence, the United States hopes Israel's military response will be limited in scope. A second source said there is U.S. intelligence showing that Israel is considering a limited and large-scale attack on Iranian territory. A senior administration official said Israel has not given an official warning to the United States about its plans or when the attack might occur. This official also said that if Israel does not respond to Iran, the U.S. believes that there will be a de-escalation and the situation will return to the way it was before. Difficult choice. Analysts say Israel has few options and each comes with a price, especially as the country is embroiled in a disastrous 6-month war with Hamas in the Gaza Strip and is confronting many Iran-backed militants in the region. A direct attack on Iran would set a different precedent. Although Israel is believed to have conducted covert operations in Iran for many years, often targeting individuals or facilities considered threats to the country's security, it has never conducted any such action. Launch a direct military attack on Iranian territory. Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi warned that even the smallest action against Iran's interests would be met with a severe, widespread and painful reaction, describing Iran's attack on Israel as an act of legal defense. We are certainly in a new phase and a very dangerous phase in the confrontation between Israel and Iran. Iran has certainly tried to change the rules of the game with Israel. We will probably face many more direct attacks in the future, said Rest Simd, an Iran expert at the Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, in Tel Aviv. He said that, while Israel is unlikely not to retaliate, it is unlikely to launch an immediate full-scale military attack against targets inside Iranian territory, as Tehran has declared Dad will respond with an even bigger attack than last weekend's airstrike. Israel's priority is to continue and focus on achieving our main goals in Gaza, not opening new fronts, said expert Simt. Alon Pincus, a former Israeli diplomat, said it was unlikely that Israel would retaliate by directly attacking Iran. But if that happens, the consequences will depend on the goals. He said targets could include military hardware or Iran's nuclear program. According to him, each target will represent a different level of escalation. An Israeli official said that one of the military options being considered is to attack an Iranian facility to send a message to Tehran but avoid causing casualties. Pressure from allies. Tamir Heyman, the former head of Israel's military intelligence agency, said Israel's response may be limited by the fact that it operates as part of an informal coalition in response to the missile barrage and Iranian drones. The Iranian airstrike was stopped with the help of allies, including the US, UK and France, as well as Jordan. This alliance is effective and important, but it will limit the freedom of action to respond, said Heyman, who now heads the Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, in Tel Aviv. Israel's Western and Arab allies have prevented it from responding to Iran's attack. According to U.S. officials, U.S. President Joe Biden and senior members of his national security team have told their Israeli counterparts that the U.S. will not engage in any offensive action against Iran. Mr. Biden considered Israel's successful interception of Iran's fierce airstrike a major victory and suggested that Israel's further response was unnecessary. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby reiterated the point. Just because Iran launched this unprecedented attack does not mean we should accept continued escalation in the region, Mr. Kirby emphasized. Internal politics. Israel will also likely take domestic political considerations into account. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu leads the most far-right coalition in Israel's history, and keeping the government from collapsing will require appeasement by hardliners. Mr. Netanyahu has been fiercely criticized domestically for his failure to prevent an attack launched by Hamas last October on Israel, as well as his failure to ensure the release of more than 100 hostages still in Gaza. Expert Pincus said that any Israeli decision to retaliate against Iran will be heavily influenced by Prime Minister Netanyahu's far-right government and the Prime Minister's own need for political survival. According to Mr. Pincus, in Israel, the public does not want to open another front, while the army is still fighting in Gaza. People are still in despair and shock about what happened in October, so I don't think the public wants to escalate and open a direct conflict with Iran, Mr. Pincus said. Voices from the international community. Before Iran's attack over the weekend, Israel was isolated internationally due to its actions in the war in Gaza, where more than 33,000 Palestinians have died. However, since the Iranian attack, Western allies have rallied around Israel and supported its right to self-defense. Relations with Arab countries. Arab countries, including those friendly to Israel, have expressed concern about the risk of escalating Iran's attack, but have not condemned it outright. Israel said most drones fired from Iran were intercepted outside its airspace. Jordan has shot down several drones and faced criticism in the Arab world for this action. Jordan argued that this was done to protect its citizens and in response to violations of its airspace. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico believes that Russia will win the war in Ukraine and will never return the Crimean Peninsula as well as the Donbas region, including Lugansk and Donetsk provinces, to Ukraine, Pravda reported. According to Mr. Fico, recognition of the principle of territorial integrity in the case of Ukraine is only a theoretical concept of international law, and any solution to resolve the conflict will be costly. The Slovak leader also believes that the Russians will win militarily because Ukraine lacks military potential and strength in the conflict with Russia. According to international law, we all recognize the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and inviolability of other countries' borders. This is the correct theory of international law. But the Russians will never give up Crimea, Donbas, or Lugansk, Mr. Fico emphasized. The Slovak leader added, "There is no military solution and there never will be. There will only be 100,000 more deaths on one side or the other." Slovakia's prime minister again called for an end to hostilities in Ukraine and said that negotiators could propose, for example, giving special status to Russian-controlled areas in eastern Ukraine and organizing a subsequent referendum on their future. Mr. Fico has long criticized Western countries' strategy toward Ukraine, which has been fighting against Russia for more than 2 years. According to the Slovak leader, Ukraine is losing territory every day. Russia has gained more territory after the attacks. Ukraine has no military capacity and military power. The only thing that can help them is NATO intervention, but if that happens it will lead to World War III, Mr. Fico declared. The Slovak government, after Mr. Fico took office last fall, stopped providing military aid to Ukraine from state reserves. But the country still leaves open the possibility of providing commercial weapons to Kiev. Fico also said he would not change his view on the war in Ukraine because of the opposing views of his Czech counterpart Petr Fiala. This has caused bilateral consultations between the two sides to be suspended. In response to Prague's decision to stop negotiations with his cabinet, Prime Minister Robert Fico stated that the Czech government had chosen to jeopardize bilateral relations simply to support the war in Ukraine.